Good morning, everyone. Now, yesterday in the High Court, there was a judgment on the government's Rwanda asylum scheme. Now, you may remember back in April, they came up with this convoluted scheme to send asylum seekers to Rwanda, where they would be processed there or even stay there permanently. But it never took place. I mean, it was just essentially a distraction to pretend that they were doing something just before their local election campaign for the May 2022 elections. But they've been banging on about it ever since, as though this is going to be the solution to the migrant crisis in the English Channel and the wider migrant crisis of illegal immigrants coming to the UK who are mostly military-aged men who end up sometimes causing lots of social issues and social problems in some of the places where they go to. Well, the Rwanda scheme isn't going to do that, and it's not going to solve the problem at all. The first flight was supposed to leave on the 14th of June, but of course the human rights lawyers got that stopped in the courts in the UK, and there's been a court case going on for the last 6 months about whether the government can put 8 asylum seekers who were the named people in the court case on a flight to Rwanda or not. Well, now it's December, 6 months after the flight was supposed to happen, and the human rights lawyers brought the case against the government to stop them from doing it, and the government has won the case. So the High Court says, well, the Rwanda scheme is actually lawful. It doesn't break the UN Refugee Convention, it doesn't break human rights law. So now the government can actually go ahead with putting people onto flights to Rwanda. Well, no, they can't, because the court process goes on. Just because there's been a judgment in the High Court, it doesn't mean that the lawyers for the asylum seekers, who are the nexus of the focus in question here, can go on to other levels in the judiciary and return the case to court. Now, this is what almost always happens. The High Court makes a judgment, then they seek leave to appeal, then it will go to the appeal court, and the appeal court will decide whether to uphold or to overturn the decision of the High Court. And if the appeal court agrees with the High Court, well, then it can go on to the Supreme Court of the UK. And if the Supreme Court still upholds the decision of the High Court, then ultimately it can go to the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, and they can make a decision which is final on the basis of what's in the European Convention of Human Rights, which we're still in. And that's also been written into UK law under Tony Blair's Human Rights Act. So just because the High Court says, well, they can go ahead, they can't actually go ahead with the scheme. So with all the 3 further iterations of court cases which are possible, they could take it again to the appeal court, to the Supreme Court, to the European Court of Human Rights. They can tie this up in court for the next 3 or 4 years. So essentially and ultimately, even if the government is successful in going through all those stages of court and getting favourable rulings for the Rwanda scheme, nothing is going to happen in terms of relocating asylum seekers to Rwanda, probably for the next 3 years at least. Meanwhile, hundreds of military-aged men continue to cross the channel every day, and all the government is doing is saying, well, sometime in the future, we might put a few hundred of them on a plane to Rwanda. But this is the key thing with the Rwanda scheme. It's not a simple relocation scheme, which is one way. It's a 2-way relocation scheme. So the UK will send asylum seekers on a plane to Rwanda, but then Rwanda will send refugees who've already been granted asylum in Rwanda on the plane and send them back to the UK. So it's really an exchange scheme. However many hundreds of people we send to Rwanda, they will send probably about the same number of people back. And that is actually written in the agreement, which was published on the 14th of April. of 2022. And it's called the Memorandum of Understanding between the government of the United Kingdom and the government of the Republic of Rwanda about the Asylum Partnership Agreement. Section 16 of that agreement says the participants will make arrangements for the UK to resettle a portion of Rwanda's most vulnerable refugees in the UK, recognising both participants' commitment towards providing better international protection for refugees. So it's right there in section 16 of the agreement that Rwanda will relocate and resettle some of their refugees to the UK. So it's not any kind of scheme that is going to reduce the numbers of asylum seekers or refugees in total in the UK. It's a simple exchange scheme. Where it does benefit Rwanda is the UK will give them £120 million for the privilege. So, of course, the government of Rwanda loves the scheme because they're not going to have any net increase in population, but they get a big load of money, which will go quite a long way in Rwanda. So they love it, and they're very, very in favour of the scheme. But, of course, the people who lose in all of this are ordinary, hard-working British people. Now, I've got nothing against giving genuine asylum to genuine asylum seekers. But what we have at the moment are 90% plus military-aged men. They're coming into the country, then they're settling, they're anchoring themselves here. The government is giving inordinate amounts of asylum to people who don't genuinely deserve it because they're not genuine refugees. But then once they've got the right to remain in the country, then they're bringing in their families and their children who for some reason are living safely back in Albania or whatever countries they're coming from, while a few men come over, establish themselves, and then they bring their families over in the first place after they've been given leave to remain. Genuine refugees would all flee together for their lives as a family. Men, women, and children would be fleeing out of war zones. You wouldn't have someone coming over with a lot of money, establishing themselves, and then paying for their families to come over at their leisure. That's clearly, in that case, that they are clearly not genuine refugees because the families are still living safely in Albania and the countries where their husbands or brothers are coming from. So what we need to do, as I've said many times before, is to push the boats back to France, which are full of chancers and bogus asylum seekers and people who are not fleeing a safe country, because if they're in France, they're in a safe country. If someone is a genuine refugee, they will run for their lives and they will just eke out whatever existence they can in the first safe country they come to. The fact is that with all of the schemes that we've got, the really genuine refugees are still living in camps in Turkey or Lebanon or Jordan if they're coming from Syria, or Uzbekistan if they're fleeing Afghanistan, if they can get there. And they never get any assistance, even from the schemes that the UK government has got in place to bring people from Ukraine and Syria. For example, Christians who are fleeing for their lives from Islamists, they don't get the recognition. They don't get a spot on the plane to come to the UK, even from the scheme that's set up to relocate people from Syria who are stuck in camps in Turkey and so on. So we get very, very few genuine asylum seekers, genuine refugees coming to the UK, whether it's illegally from France or even whether it's in the schemes that the government has set up to virtue signal about, oh, we're doing something to help Syria after we bombed it. We shouldn't have bombed Syria in the first place. We shouldn't have done that to Libya either. And the action in Afghanistan and Ukraine now is completely disastrous. We shouldn't be getting involved in these kind of conflicts which just generate hundreds of thousands and millions of refugees. It's absolutely stupid to be doing this, and the governments just keep on doing it over and over again. Let's not do these stupid foreign wars which ruin countries and then cause people to have to flee. But as I was saying, the people who are politicians, the people who virtue signal and they write for The Guardian or whatever, they're never affected by hundreds of thousands of military-age men coming into the country, because they can live in their gated communities in Oxfordshire or whatever, or Notting Hill or wherever they live. I don't know. They don't have to share their space and their time and their resources and their community and their parks and their libraries and their schools and their hospitals and their GP surgeries with people who are coming to the country that they want to welcome into the country, and then go back to their nice little enclaves where they can live a life free and untouched by the massive social changes that they are advocating for. The people who are affected are ordinary working people in this country who are already suffering a bad time because of terrible, terrible government economic policies, both under Blair and Brown and also under Cameron, May and Johnson and now Sunak. The people who are affected are in places like Skegness or Margate or Dover or Rotherham or Rochdale or Telford, where you have lots of military-aged men, and there are immense social problems that we all know about. Women are not safe anymore in some of these places. And that is entirely the fault of this government, the previous government, the Labour government, the Tory government. They're all working together to increase rapid mass immigration into the country, and they're cheerleaders in the mainstream media. So we need a change. The Heritage Party is here for change if you want it. So please come and join me in the Heritage Party. If we get into power, we will immediately retask the Border Force and the Royal Navy with stopping boats rather than meeting them and ferrying the passengers like a taxi service to Dover. And we will put strict caps on legal immigration, which there aren't any at the moment, really. There should only be a maximum of 50,000 foreign students, for example, coming into the UK every year to study at universities, not hundreds of thousands as we have at the moment. A lot of them doing complete noddy courses, and they just do it so that they can anchor themselves and get a place in the UK. Not really interested in being educated. They're just interested in coming here and often disappearing into the black economy, or getting leave to remain and then going on to welfare. That's not contributing to the economy or the country whatsoever. It's a big scam and it needs to be stopped. We must have strict caps on student visas and strict caps on work visas as well, particularly for unskilled or semi-skilled labour, or even skilled labour. We should be training enough of our own young people to be plumbers and builders and carpenters and joiners and engineers and IT technicians and doctors and nurses and midwives and dentists, to do the jobs that can be done and need to be done in this country, rather than saying, oh, well, there's a shortage of nurses and doctors because we deliberately haven't trained enough over the last 20 years, and therefore we need to have a mass migration of doctors and nurses from the Philippines and other countries. Now, I don't at all blame doctors and nurses from the Philippines. They're wonderful. But we shouldn't need to be bringing nurses from the Philippines when we should be training enough of our own nurses in this country to do all the nursing that needs to be done. And that's something that has been degenerated and run down for 20 years or more. And that needs to change, and we need to change that right now, so that we're not having the same conversation in 5 years or 10 years' time as we are today. We need to change things now, and we need to get started and get going on it. There's going to be a general election within the next 2 years, so I need you, your country needs you. Please, once again, I'll just make that appeal again. Come and join me in the Heritage Party, support us, stand as a candidate as well, so that we can get into the positions of power in local government and national government and change things around to make this country work again for the people and to restore our nation. So heritageparty.org, join us there. Please also do give me a thumbs up below and subscribe to my channel. Okay, that would really help. And thank you for listening. God bless you all.